I'm Dibyesh Anand. I'm head of Department of Politics and IR. And Kashmir is one of the interests we have as part of Emerging Powers program, which is a research program within the department. So we have 3 different research programs. One is on Center for Study of Democracy, which is internationally renowned. We have Security and IR program, and Emerging Powers is the new one. But with Emerging Powers, part of the challenge is that it says Emerging Powers, which implies mainly China, India, Iran, Brazil, and other places. But my own interest is less about India and China and more about Tibet or Kashmir. So they don't really fit in as part of Emerging Powers. But I guess it's good to do research that's subversive partly, but also tries to cash in on renewed interest people have, let's say in the UK, on non-Western parts of the world. Today what we have is film screening and panel discussion on Kashmir, a people divided. Most of you would know something or other thing about Kashmir, but very briefly, Kashmir is a place. Kashmir is a place that's divided. Kashmir is a people that are divided and occupied. And every term we use for Kashmiris, and we are using Kashmir now generally for people of Jammu and Kashmir, which is a state which is divided between India, China and Pakistan, but mainly India and Pakistan. Whatever term we use, it would always be problematic in terms of who do we offend or who do we not offend. For instance, if in India, if the map shows Indian held Kashmir, Pakistan held Kashmir, you'd assume that it should be neutral. It's not. They will not allow any qualifying term for Kashmir, such as Indian held, Indian occupied, Indian brutalized. Forget, they will never say Indian brutalized, but none of that is acceptable. So we always have to therefore struggle even with terms. Do we call it Indian occupied, Pakistan occupied, Indian controlled, Pakistan controlled, Indian, what was the term using? Indian side of Jammu. Indian side of Jammu Kashmir, Pakistan side of Jammu Kashmir. It is a contested term, but of course what we need to remember is, while we're talking conflict or Kashmir question or Kashmir issue, we're talking of people who are divided. And the reason, for instance, I agreed to, and in fact I was quite keen on welcoming the 2 movie makers and the Conciliation Resources, and I'll introduce the Conciliation Resource to you. Wanted them to come here because it's a good opportunity to focus on people who suffer, and people who experience that occupation, and people who suffer that division. Because often in international relations and politics, we look at India, Pakistan, how they fight over Kashmir. What we don't focus on is how Kashmiri get crushed, occupied and brutalized by one side, both sides, more than one side, or more than 2 sides also. So our interest therefore is to look at, and we'll have 2 very short movies about the experience of being divided. Divided is the term they use. Of course, we could also use the term occupied and divided also. It depends on us. But I'll just give you a brief introduction to the 3 main speakers here. First is Nitasha Kaul. She's an academic but also a writer. She's an economist, but also has written on Bhutan, democracy and Kashmir. And her new novel, Residue, which also deals with issues of divisions and deals with Kashmir, is recently out, and it's out it was in fact out in February. And she's given lectures in various places in different parts of the world, and also written in different newspapers, media, magazines, but also academic writing. She's the main discussant today, and the 2 people who have been associated closely with movies, one is Mohammad Irfan, who was born, and I'll read from here, and grew amidst the political conflict of Kashmir. For past 8 years, he has been working with the social and cultural spaces in the Indian side of Kashmir. So they use the word Indian side. Irfan's main focus has been working with the children of Kashmir through visual arts, performing arts, and cinema workshops and training modules to help children tell their own stories. And he has been helped in this movie, if I'm not mistaken, by Pawan Bali, who's a journalist. She's not here right now. She's also from the Indian side of Kashmir. And I say side with emphasis because I don't use the word side, but that's what the term you're using right now. She has been a television journalist in India and with leading channels, CNN, IBN, and also has worked with Times of India, Indian Express newspapers, and many other mainstream newspapers in India. And we have Muhammad Arif Urfi. He's a senior journalist who runs Geo News Bureau in Muzaffarabad. He has wide experience of working with print and electronic media, including television news network, TNN, and Reuters. So he has also worked with Pakistan television, the PTV, and he used to cover India-Pakistan escalation on line of control. So when people say LOC, they mean line of control, which is the practical line that divides India and Pakistan in Kashmir. Right? Because it's line of control because it's not an international boundary. Remember, India has international boundary with Pakistan, and Pakistan has an international boundary with India. Means it's agreed. Because both of them claim the entire state of Jammu and Kashmir, so the boundary is not a boundary, but it's called line of control. And he has also worked, apart from his role as journalist, he's also produced documentaries for different organizations such as Community Participation, World Bank, First Step World Food Programme, and also for UNDP. But I'd rather, because this, I guess, part of this is in collaboration with Conciliation Resources. I'll invite Tahir to come and introduce what Conciliation Resource is all about and how these movies, in your view, is about conciliation.
Okay. Thank you very much, Dibyesh. It's always a pleasure to listen to you. My name is Tahir Aziz, and I work with Conciliation Resources as the organization's India-Pakistan Kashmir Program Director. Conciliation Resources is a London-based NGO that works in the field of conflict transformation or peace building or conflict resolution. We are almost 18-20 years old organization, and we have been involved in a variety of contexts in different geographical regions where conflict has surfaced as has taken a violent and armed shape. And the idea behind the work of Conciliation Resources is to support local voices and people within a given context who are concerned about their situation, who are concerned about the conflict that they face, and who are also trying to play their role to make a difference, to make change. So Conciliation Resources believes that any conflict, any given conflict, the possibility for change within a given context is only viable and sustainable and doable when the people who are the first and foremost party who are affected by that conflict are involved in terms of looking for solutions, who own that solution and create processes. So they need to be accompanied, they need to be supported. So Conciliation Resources believes in supporting such processes and initiatives. So this variety of regions I mentioned are around 8-9 different regions, including Caucasus, West Africa, East Africa, Fiji, Colombia, Philippines, and also India and Pakistan in a specific context of Kashmir, where we have been involved now for about 6-7 years, and we have worked on both sides of the line of control, the LOC, working with different civic and political actors to support their engagement, to support dialogue, to support the possibilities for internal joint assessment and joint analysis, and also to promote some collaborative thinking so that they can find capacity and ideas and support for changing their situation. So this has been a long-term engagement. So one of the areas, in addition to other areas, which included supporting the trade process between the two Kashmiris, supporting educational institutions to find common ground and collaborate in terms of research, finding women groups to have internal, intra-regional on either side, but also across the line of control, some collaboration, and to understand their own issues and perspectives. Also the youth groups on both sides. So it's kind of a variety of areas where we have been involved supporting local partners. But one of the areas which is relevant today is the area of supporting local filmmakers, directors, journalists to collaborate and jointly produce a documentary. Now these ideas emerged out of our engagement, the joint analysis that we undertook with a variety of civil society actors, including the journalists. And they had ideas. One of the person who is primarily involved in terms of conceiving this idea was the journalist that Dibyesh mentioned, Pawan Bali, and Arif, Urfi on the Pakistani side, or Pakistani administered Kashmir, also had similar ideas. But I think there was a lack of opportunity and communication, and the process did not allow practically to implement those ideas. So our role has been to enable the possibility for joint interaction, dialogue, and joint assessment, and a joint shared analysis on a variety of things, including the terminology that Dibyesh very eloquently kind of contextualized. To name terminology of naming Kashmir, for example. Conflicts are messy, they have, they're contested, and Kashmir is no exception to that. It's been a kind of 60, 70 years old conflict, so everything about it is contested, but it's also about people of that region and who are divided, but also have diverse opinions. And common opinions, but also diverse opinions. So the film was kind of situated in the context. But you have political context that is diverse, but at the same time you have inability and the practical conditions that don't necessarily allow such thinking to happen. Or if such thinking is there, then the possibility for kind of realizing that thinking into kind of collaborative joint project was a kind of a distant reality at some point. But with some support and creativity and perseverance, these journalists were able, and we also kind of took part in that, were able to have a very meaningful dialogue. My personal experience is that this process has been about a constant dialogue and understanding about each other, but also finding ways to influence thinking and present ideas in largely neutral, non-political, apolitical ways. So that's what this film, the first film, I don't know which film, Journey Through River Vitasta, which is kind of a story of people trapped through cameras who are living on both sides of Kashmir, but also are divided. And it's a very interesting film. Final thing I would want to say about this film is that this is 2-3 years old film, a very short, brief documentary, but I think it has been a very useful tool and a powerful technique and kind of mechanism for us to screen it and to promote dialogue and enable creative thinking. I mean, we have screened it very widely within the region and outside of the region, and we constantly get requests. It's not a kind of a masterpiece as such, but it is in a way. But I think it was a first kind of a production of its kind, jointly made, filmed on either side separately, but then enabled through interaction, through kind of different mechanisms, and then finally through a meeting outside of the region where these directors met and spent a lot of time in terms of jointly editing it. So it has been a very powerful way of promoting dialogue and thinking and influencing opinions. And subsequently they also made another film, which if we had enough time we'll screen that, which is about finding common ground in terms of faith, which, you know, in terms of Kashmir has been a common area where people from diverse faiths never found kind of faith as a divisive element. But because of the line of control, because of the partition, because of many other kind of mindsets, this is not currently possible for people of any faith to go and visit their places of their respect and that's about that. But we might come to that. But anyway, thank you very much for coming today. And the Conciliation Resources is committed to supporting greater good creative ideas, and I think this is a great encouragement. We thank Dibyesh and Nitasha for being here with us today and organizing this. This is, I think, a really, really good encouragement to these filmmakers. And Irfan, who is relatively new in this process, but he's been part of the second documentary, editing that, but a creative director in his own right. So thank you.
Thank you. Thanks. What was I thinking? I was supposed to say something, I forgot. Anyway, let's start with the first movie, right? Which is
this one.
This one. Do you think should remove the light?
Screening's on.
So now, Arif, who should we start with? No, take this chair. I don't need this. I don't want to say so. We'll have another movie. We'll have discussion. But before I open it to audience, I mean, Urfi, what about you? I mean, I'm not interested so much in the movie making part, but why did you want to make this film?
Actually, this is not a film. This is basically emotions and some desires behind this project. And thanks God, this chance has been given to me, because this project made history, you know. Because we have been divided, it's about 67, 70 years. And we were trying to express that the people who have been divided due to the conflict between India and Pakistan, okay, if they have some conflict, but the people who are suffering this conflict, they should be given a chance to meet each other, to understand each other. Because the conflict is not between the people of the area, people of the region. Conflict is between two countries, and it's not on the people. Conflict is on the land, because they have claim on that land. Therefore, we try to do our job. It's just a try. You know, it's not some sort of professional documentary, or there's some sort of professional project with the professional team, with the professional crew. It was just a sort of little contribution to this regard.
Irfan, when did you first see this film? Did you see it while it was being made, or
no? I didn't see this film. I saw this film when I got involved in the second one. In the second one.
Okay, yeah. So when you saw this film, what was your first reaction? Did it speak to you, or was it something that you? I mean, what was your first impression?
I think it in a lot of ways it broke away my ideas of conventional filmmaking, because I've had I've had my master's in film training, and for 2 years we were taught how you need to make films in controlled situations with huge crew and huge finances. Then you see this film, and all what you read actually does not apply, and yet you're able to relate to the story, relate to the people. And for me, I was honestly not much taken in by the stories, because somewhere I've met similar people while being in Kashmir. But what struck me was this fact that two people who have not met for about a year and are shooting on two sides of Kashmir. I could only imagine that when Urfi was probably shooting on his side, a sequence, he would be thinking and hoping that Pawan should carry on the remaining half of the story, because he could only guess that Pawan would be carrying. And likewise for Pawan, that she would guess that Urfi would be taking the other half. And there are a lot of things which have happened, they're very fortunate accidents, some technical. So in the second film, so basically the interviews taken on, which Urfi has taken, has the subjects looking left to right of the frame, and what Pawan has taken is subjects looking right to left of the frame. And it's purely accidental, but if you read sort of the symbolism through that, it speaks a lot. So for me also, there has been a lot of learning in ways in which you can still make sense of the stories by not being called one of those state bashing, always ranting people, and yet make the same point with more authentication.
Nitasha, so what do you think? I know it's not a state bashing, Azadi ranting or whatever movie, but what did you think of the movie when you saw this?
What did I think of the movie? I think firstly, it's very well. There's obviously that very striking human aspect that the way we that there is this land, and it's the emotions that are aroused in us and the way in which we belong to the land that can lead to such complicated divides between people, and yet it is not between people. So obviously at one level we know about the violence of nation state, and we look at all these places that have been that have been divided, and the effect of people's lives, and it seems somewhere along the line, if you look in the context of Kashmir, it's like there's this metamorphic rock kind of a thing, there's like these layers and layers and layers and layers, or tree rings if you like, of sufferings that going back to that you can almost locate all of that, and somehow you just wonder how we manage to continue to live with the history of that memory and the accumulation of all of that and the various traumas that come at different times, and so many false starts, and so many times when you think that things may take a turn for the better, and hopes get betrayed. So it's very poignant. I think that was the first thing. And the way in which it draws attention to the absences that there are in the way in which people on either side, like what he was talking about, that and in the imaginations of the people and how they think about what's then the river as obviously as something that crosses over the boundary. I thought that was very powerful, because there is this territory itself. I mean, if you look in critical geography, the very idea of territory is also actually a construction that, if you look at, for instance, Stuart Ellsworth, the idea of how does the concept of territory get born, and when you start investigating that, and then look into how what the concept of sovereignty means, and what does it mean to actually control the land, and how are the people who are living on that land, where is the locus of responsibility with respect to those people. One of the people in the film says, if you want to fight a war, why don't you go to another country? It's beautiful because it just gives you a sense of how people see that conflict. That for them it's just a conflict that's happening, and if that's how damnedly you want to possess it, just go and take your violence elsewhere, because to them it's not their violence. There are, of course, all these the vested interests and all of that, and in some sense, I don't think we can escape the politics, because filmmaking itself lies in that larger matrix of power, and how do we? But still, it is important that to see and say what the stories that we tell, what do they tell about us? Why are we telling these stories, and what does it mean? And I don't think any kind of violence is possible without dehumanization. And in order to not dehumanize, telling stories is important to make people seem like they are actually people, and not just a unit somewhere.
Would you say then that, for instance, if let's say people in India or Pakistan, not Kashmir, but people in India and Pakistan, in Delhi, Bombay, Karachi, Islamabad, if they saw this movie and the policy makers saw this movie, do you think that the policy towards Kashmir will change? I mean, you said, I know the stories humanize people, right? So they humanize people, and in a sense, sort of tries to delegitimize violence, or tries to make violence more difficult than it would be if they were dehumanized. But if such kinds of movies are made more and more, and shown not to Kashmiris who can relate to it, but to non-Kashmiris, so to Indians and Pakistanis, then what are the barriers in the way of Indians and Pakistanis seeing humanity here, and maybe not brutalizing Kashmiris the way they brutalize?
Do you want me to answer or me?
Well, first you and then I'll
Okay.
come back. So, no.
So you're asking me when a policymaker in India or Pakistan sees this, how?
I mean, movie. If someone sees movie, they will be moved by it, right? But do you think that policymakers in Bombay or in India or Pakistan, or even normal Indian or Pakistani nationalists, would they be moved by these movies?
Well,
Would it speak to them or not?
Would it speak to them? Well, I think it depends on, obviously it depends on who those people are, and at some level, of course, there is that it's very difficult to get someone to understand something if their livelihood depends on their not understanding it. So, of course, that if there are people whose interest lies in perpetuation of violence or whose interest lies in prolonging the conflict, then yes, it would probably be you would probably need a Dostoevskian moment for them to see it. But if you mean the general larger question of the extent to which, I mean, the politics of cinema, of a certain kind of humanist cinema, then I think that there is a space for that. And in this context, I think it goes into that discourse of of that whole thing about wars beginning in the minds of people, and that's where the defenses of peace must be constructed, kind of a thing. That it is that you need to get people to think differently about language and about how they perceive a certain situation, what are the words they use, and I think that would make a difference. I think because a lot of it I think a lot of bigotry also comes from ignorance. And that to that extent, when people recognize that, basically the dangers of the larger nationalist project, which especially, I mean, say from the Indian context right now, what's happening are especially very, very dangerous. I mean, with the elections coming up and the right wing and all of that, I think that it is important to keep hammering away at that language and to make people see that this is something that these stories, I think that is important. I think it would make a difference. I tend to be an optimist, so I think it would.
Because things are going to be changed gradually. For example, when I started shooting this film, I was not be able to move freely. It was very difficult for me to shoot on some certain places. But after this movie, my visibility was more and more became. Now then I started shooting second film, I have been given a chance. I have been given a political space to do something. Therefore, it means things are going to be changed rapidly, and there will be.
So, was this movie screened in, let's say, Islamabad or Karachi?
Yeah.
And what was the response of the non-Kashmiri in Pakistan?
Oh, that's a question, because people.
I'm not challenging. I'm just interested in how would they respond to this.
They respond very positively, and they were not aware of the miseries of the people of the area. People of the divided families, and the people who are suffering this divide, especially, can you imagine a person who is living on the right bank of the river cannot contact with the person who is his relative on the other bank of the river? He wrap up a letter with a stone and threw it to the other side of the river, and his or her brother or sister took that letter and replies on a paper and put it, wrap up it with the stone and throw it back to the Pakistani side or the Indian side of Jammu. In this era of the communication, when you are the whole world is just on your fingertips. The thing is very, very difficult to understand that why they should be given a chance to meet each other, to revive their relationships.
What about you, Irfan? I mean, in terms of, do you know, was it screened in other parts of in India, for instance? No, or did any of your Indian friends watch this, and how was their response?
I think there's no particular response that I would remember, but you can, if I may take, there's a generalized kind of a response that the Indian audiences has to these kind of films. The problem is that there hasn't been much sort of shot written or not written, but there haven't been enough films made on Kashmir, in the past. So what people from my own generation, let's say from the mainstream India, would know about Kashmir would be at best that it's a place of violence and conflict, or it's a hilly area where people grow apples. Because these are the questions that I was faced with when I first moved to Delhi 7 years ago, where people who are my really good friends now questioned me about whether we had roots, because for them Kashmir was all mountain. And I was wearing a UCB shirt. They asked me where did I get it, and my first immediate response would have been to be angry, but the other answer was that we have a store there. I bought it. So the point is that films like these or our work is to challenge what otherwise is a danger of a single narrative. That people would only know one part of the story, one version of the story, and it's fed over and over again till the point mainstream believes it. So people might still disagree with these films, but at least they know that there are different versions of the same story they would have heard over time. And over time it adds some contribution to the discourse, which is otherwise. So I don't know how policymakers take it, because I haven't met one yet. But in general, people have, I think there is a space where at least people from the younger generation, there is a growing percentage who are sensitive enough to watch films, sit and discuss, even if they disagree by the end of it. But I think even to come to a place where people allow you to screen your films and not sort of burn the screens, as it happens commonly, is quite an achievement in the last 5 years.
Nitasha, before I open for a few questions, could it be, I'm just wondering, that space, which Urfi was talking about, that people are getting that political space to these movies. With things like Jashin-e-Azadi, there's another film a few years ago that was made, and a lot of screenings of that was stopped in various parts of India now, not when it was made, but now, by the right-wing goons. I'm just, in terms of the message that the film gives, is there not a message that, well, yes, things are bad, state have done it, but let's not blame it. The idea is people are divided, all they need is to live happily together. Allow cross-border cross-border trade and everything, and things will be fine. I remember, I know that you have been writing a lot on Kashmir specific since the stone pelting of 2010 and other things. Do you think that those who were pelting stone, or those who were killed by Indian state, in large numbers, when they see this kind of movie, and it's all about trade and everything, would their aspirations, some would say aspiration for Azadi, some would say aspiration for something else, would that be addressed by these kinds of ventures?
Probably, to be honest, probably not. But then I don't think that that's what it sets out to do, insofar as I understand it. I think that there are different stories that can be told about that conflict, and I think this is one of those stories. I mean, I think there is the story, the Sanjay Kak film, that what does Independence Day mean in Kashmir? So there's that story. There's the story of other movie screenings have also been disrupted recently, Ocean of Tears in Kerala. So then there's the story of all the people who've gone missing. Then there's the story of the women who've suffered, and the story of the army brutality, the story of the people who disappeared and didn't come back again. This particular story, I think, focuses on the LOC and that is also a rich vein in that conversation. I mean, in the sense that people, at various points, I think in 2008, somebody said that the LOC should become the line of commerce, that, it's the old historic trade connections that need to be revived. In a sense, it's probably a probably more pragmatically, probably more pragmatic story to be telling, because in this day and age, I think it is very difficult for people to object to the idea of trade. I mean, regardless of your political position, you would not actually say that people should not trade with each other. So at that sense, it's appealing to a very a common denominator, irrespective of political positions, in that at least allow the trade, at least allow people to meet each other. And I think that's part of the value of what this is doing, is drawing attention to the fact of the economic suffering. And remember, I mean, one of the ways in which arguments for self-determination are thwarted are also to do with the fact that there is a problem of economic viability. So there is that question of recognizing that that this can be addressed. In a very wider sense, if you take just the narrative of self-determination, yes, I mean, part of self-determination is being able to trade, is being able to, is just being able to live your, determining every aspect of your life, including not having to be arbitrarily separated from people whom you are related to. And some of these questions otherwise just run up against this blankness of the why, why us? Why can I not see this member of my family who have, for 22 years? Yeah, I mean, I think it's one of those stories, and I think it is important because in the narratives of the larger nations, when we look at it from that point of view, from India versus Pakistan, then it's the subaltern aspect of the geopolitics is what we are not addressing, and I think all of this feeds into that addressing. Incidentally, I mean, I was just reading the news report today, and that's the last thing I'll say. That tomorrow, I think some kind of talks are between India and Indian and Pakistani officials. Some talks that are to happen tomorrow, and today they've released a truck driver from Azad Kashmir as a goodwill gesture. And said that and vowed that in the future we will not detain traders or drivers of trucks from the other side. So it just I saw that just after watching this film, and it seemed to kind of drive the reality of that.
Urfi, Irfan, you want to add anything before we open up to audience questions?
No.
Okay.
I just have one question. I was just like, this movie is great actually, and I have a few questions about that, the movie making process. I'm sure that you must have faced some challenges from the armed forces from both like Pakistan and in India. Did you talk to them like before making this film, and what is the perception about like when you spoke to them like you're making this movie?
I couldn't understand because she was.
Okay. What you think is like you may have felt some pressure from armed forces on both sides during the movie making process. So what kind of questionings or pressures or surveillance or monitoring that was going on, and how did you respond to it?
Actually, when you are challenging some person, or you are going to challenge some positions, ultimately you have to suffer some pressures. You will have to reply some certain questions. This is ultimately the result. But it doesn't mean you should not do the job.
But what is their perception about like this movie? Like, can you explain to them
Why you are doing this job? When you are going to take one step, which is not usually acceptable for the people, ultimately you will be questioned. Why? Of course, there were plenty of questions to me and as well to Pawan, but we did our job to minimize the conflict, to minimize the harsh and hard questions style and types. It was important to react very, very positively for those pressures. Otherwise, this film was not a project which you can appreciate. My English is not too good, but I want to make you understand. But I am going to express that it was plenty of pressures, but not pressures like that you should not do this job. Okay, I'm not doing this job. No. I have, and we have availed the chances, the spaces, the pauses between the authorities who were controlling this territory to make this project successful. It was something like practice, to complete this project. Because a lot of surveillances, a lot of intelligence agencies are working there. Highly militarized zone,
But did they see as anti-India or anti-Pakistan kind of thing, like when you trying to explain to them the concept of this movie?
Did they see?
Yeah.
Would they usually say, "Oh, you're anti-India, you're anti-Pakistan," which is the usual?
Yeah. In Pakistani side of Jammu and Kashmir, I have been blamed that I am Indian agent.
And I'm sure on the other side, it's the same, they would blame them as Pakistani agents. I think that's very common in Kashmir, where everyone is blamed to be agent of everyone. Not only one. Everyone is agent of everyone. India, Pakistan, US, Britain, China, and I don't know, or other world also. Okay, any other question? Any next question? No? I have many, so that's where I want others to ask, you see. So,
are people in this room aware of Kashmiriyat? Do you know what Kashmiriyat is?
No.
So I think that's what this movie is.
so can you explain, because they wouldn't, so many of them don't. Some of them do, but most of them, many of them may not.
I mean, that's maybe you want to talk about it because the other film, which we haven't seen, but that has, that is drawing upon this common kind of.
Actually, Natasha, we have a specific perception about the Kashmir because living in Pakistani part of, Pakistani part, we consider Kashmir as our property and it's like a bone-up contention between India and Pakistan. That's why we fought so many wars on there. And apart from this specific perception, a specific notion of defining Kashmir, in Indian side, I hope the same situation is going on there because I have been in Muzaffarabad during the earthquake season because I was there, I worked voluntarily. But the situation, we don't know how the Kashmiri perceive about the Kashmir. Because in Pakistan, living in Pakistan, we think all of the Kashmir, they want to be part of the Pakistan. And I also think similar way in the Indian side, they also think the Kashmir is also the property of the Indian state. So we don't know actually what you Kashmiri people think about us and about the Kashmir. So can you explain please that?
So that's I think what
So he's asking, what do Kashmiris want?
No, I think it's quite true. I mean, that is the single narrative that India and Pakistan has been fed very systematically for the last 25 years. At least, I will talk of 25 years because I wasn't born before that. So I don't want to sort of claim historical understanding before that. But the point is that, people from my generation, let's say in mainstream India, in metropolitans who are very intelligent, sharp people, who have opinions on everything and are in a position to understand a lot of things. But Kashmir for them has been only a headline, a breaking news, right, when they were growing up. So they would only get to see breaking news on the news, television set when they're either having breakfast with their family or having a dinner. So whatever is fed for those 30 minutes, 20 minutes stays in their head while they're growing up. And then there is this common perception that it's our property, and there are people from Pakistan trying to come in and sort of grow terrorists in the state, and Kashmiri people. So for India also, a lot of people say that you were also oppressed by Pakistan. So I think the idea is to now challenge these things that it's easy to get angry and say that you are stupid for saying these things, but that will only worsen things. If you really want them to know things, then you need to explain them and at times oversimplify things, because the problem is that not much has been spoken and not much is also allowed to be spoken. Natasha was talking about the Ocean of Tears. It's so unfortunate that a film which was commissioned by the Public Diplomacy Division, which is a Government of India body, which was given a censor certification clearance by the Censor Board, which is a Government of India body, yet when they had their first film screening in the University of Kashmir, police came 3 hours before the screening and locked up the venue. I mean, you can't even imagine that kind of inside the university campus, not more than 5 students can sit, even to have snacks. It's also seen as some activity which is reported to the Vice Chancellor. I mean, in that space, how can we even think of alternatives? How can we even think of something which is not anger? So I think it's part of us also to understand that there's only one narrative out, so we need to speak as many narratives and versions of stories that are actually the version of the same story. There's no one truth to it. And so I've just mixed a lot of things.
Going to Kashmir, because he had asked what does Kashmir
I mean, I think that is the biggest resource that one has in one looks at the history of Kashmir, because Kashmir is a very syncretic culture, and historically, I mean, there is a very strong tradition of Kashmiriyat which relates to a Kashmiri identity, which is not defined or limited by whether a person is a Hindu or a Muslim or a Buddhist or or Shia or Sunni. There is a commonality of customs, including occasions and festivals and things that had that had overlapping and shared meanings for people in Kashmir who identified themselves as Kashmiris, and rather than as Indians or Pakistanis. And that is one of the biggest, and the loss of that that understanding of that Kashmiriyat has been one of the biggest casualty of of the conflict over the last few decades, especially because it's just like we have all been talking about. It's just split that it's just become so unified, and it's just become so non-diverse. I mean, there is just that story, Pakistan story, that Kashmiris are all suffering under India. Kashmiris want to be part of Pakistan. Indian story, we have to claim it by force because there is it's whatever resentment there is only fueled by people from Pakistan, and the people of Kashmir themselves are their narratives are not part of the story. I mean, one of the in 2003, I think, and this is way before 2010, when if you go and read about what happened in the summer of 2010, it was what was called the Intifada in Kashmir, because over the period of the summer, over 100 people, young people, were killed, and they were protesting by stones in some cases, not even that. So in 2003, there's a BBC website where they have these scenarios. It's very curious that's how it's mapped, but there are like these 7 or 8 scenarios, and it goes, scenario 1, Kashmir becomes part of Pakistan. Scenario 2, Kashmir becomes this. Scenario 3, there's independent Kashmir. Scenario 4, independent Kashmir Valley. And then it talks about what are the pros and cons of each of these various scenarios. It's very interesting, but it gives you at a very basic level the various narratives that are involved in this. I mean, I think what would help is firstly to de-escalate the kind of language we use around Kashmir, because the language of strategic, sensitive, and that is just such a barrier, because it just stops people from having conversations. The moment Kashmir is mentioned, but that's a it's a strategic issue, it's a sensitive part of India. So that's one problem. The second part is to interrogate this need to want Kashmir so much on part of people who do not live in Kashmir, who are not Kashmiris, be they people in India or Pakistan or elsewhere, but why this need to want Kashmir so much? I mean, it's not simply just it's not just simply for geopolitical reasons. It's to ties into the larger narratives of how nations want to define themselves, and attention needs to be drawn then to the kinds of violence that is being committed in the name of that. And like I said, this Kashmiri identity, to promote the understanding of the commonalities of Kashmiri identity across religious divides, because what is happening is that there is a mirroring. The more that it's being seen as a Hindu versus Muslim, India versus Pakistan issue, the more it becomes sort of performative. Those boundaries, those divides become more and more entrenched, and people are forced to define themselves as we are either this or that. Whereas it was never, I don't think historically, if you look at history, it was never that uncomplicated. It was never that simplistic, the question of Kashmiri identity.
I think on that note, because we can move to the next film, which is about what is it about? I forgot what it's about. But it's the issue of religion, I guess, right?
Yeah,
and practices. Yeah. It's a good
faith, people not being able to access their faith.
But just think, while you're talking of how India and Pakistan, and what ideas, Kashmir is part of India. Kashmiris can go to hell, right? Or Kashmir is part of Pakistan, and Kashmiris can do whatever they want to. There's a very strong notion of living territorially the place, but without taking care of what the people might want. And this reminds me of, some of you may have seen Bollywood movie, most of you may not. There's an actor called Shah Rukh Khan, right? He was quite famous, well, he's still famous, a few years ago also, and he would often play this role of obsessive lover. Doesn't matter whether the woman wanted him or not, but he would play obsessive. And in the end, either the woman will be killed or he will be killed, or most of the time she will accept him. Maybe India hopes, or Pakistan hopes for that they are so obsessed with Kashmir that in the end Kashmir will give up and then accept one or the other. Maybe. Anyway, let's move on to... First, let's start with any question from audience. You prefer to sit there? That's okay. Oh, we have a chair. You can use that. Oh, that's okay. Urfi. Oh, yeah. Sorry. Question?
Natasha, to me, it's not the issue of the religion or issue of the Kashmiri people. I will see it's the politics of religion or the politics of religiosity between the two states, two nuclear powers between India and Pakistan. Is it, being a Kashmiri scholar, how would you see the politics of religiosity that's being used between both countries to control the Kashmiri region or Kashmiri territory to use it for their Western interest?
Well, I don't think that's. I don't know if that's what the movie addresses. I mean, it kind of elliptically sort of refers to that, but I think mainly what it's trying to draw attention to, I think at some point somebody vocalizes that by saying religious tourism should be allowed. So I think analogous to where in the earlier movie, like they were talking about trade, the way in which trade across the boundaries would help. I think in this movie the argument is that religion, which is an important aspect of people's lives, is a kind of religious access or access to religious memory is being denied to them because of this boundary, and that's the same as if Hindus are unable to go on to the temples, or Muslims or Sikhs who are unable to visit their shrines. I think the idea here is to draw attention to the way in which the historically basically the counterfactual, that had the boundary not been there, this or when the boundary wasn't there, this is how people interacted with each other. If I can, I mean, I actually have a couple of questions for the filmmakers, if you'll allow me. One of the things that I thought, and this struck me more with this movie, is that there's very few young people in it. That I was just thinking whether is it accidental? Is it that when you were shooting the film, was it the fact that young people are not interested in the question of religion? Because most of these people seem to be, fairly mature people of a certain age. So that was one thing.
Let me.
Okay, then I have since I'm the discussant, I'll have 2 or 3 questions to ask of them.
It was our try to find out those people who have some sort of memories of their religious and the shrines and the places of the religious concern, Therefore, there was no young people, because it's about 67 years, 68 years ago when they were used to go their holy shrines or their holy places. And after 65 or 67 years, nobody is, the young people who are, actually, most of the young people do not have so much concern with that religion.
That's what I was asking. Are those stories being fed down the generations? Do the young people know about these shrines, like these people's grandchildren or children? Would they know from your experience of having interacted, or is it getting lost?
Up to some extent. For example, from Pakistani side of Jammu and Kashmir, I interviewed that person, the Ghulam Nabi Shah, who's very much interested to go over there. His sons, they're quite young, and they are professional development professionals, really. They were interested to go over there because his father always discussed about the places, for example, Chirala Sharif or Hazrat Bal and some certain places. Therefore, they are interested to go there. But if the government and the controlling authorities, when who's say control land, there are some controlling authorities, either India and Pakistan, no matter. The controlling authority does not allow to the people, the young people especially, because the people who cross the line of control from Pakistani side of Jammu and Kashmir to the Indian side of Jammu and Kashmir, it means a person, he is infiltrator, he is terrorist. It's a common perception. People who come from the Indian side of Jammu and Kashmir and he is young, and to the Pakistani side of Jammu and Kashmir, mean he is mujahid and seeks some sort of training. This is the perception. It's not factual position is. Therefore, there's no the less mention of the participation of the young people. And were these movies seen by, Dibyesh's earlier question, by policymakers and also by some aspect of, I don't know, not armies, but by the establishment, if you like, and what was the reaction? Did they see it? Were there any screenings? The first screening with some, I don't want to mention the name of some politicians and persons who are influenced, who have some influence on the policy makers. They seen this film and some top brass high official lady was practically crying at the moment when she was watching this movie, and she was emotionally destroyed. She was emotionally, and she was not be able to speak on as her address conclusionaries. It has impact. It has emotional effect to the people who have some connections with the state of Jammu and Kashmir, with their land. It has, but the policymakers, maximum of the policymakers are not from Kashmir, you know, on the both sides. They look this issue as Pakistani or as an Indian. They don't have concern with the people who are actually sufferers. This is.
Can we go back to the audience question and Farhan?
There's a comment and perhaps a question. I couldn't read most of the text, partly maybe because I'm like those people who are in the film a bit old, belong to old generation. I couldn't read. I just used my observation based on what I saw. What was I was fascinated by different religions, and especially Sufism. And Sufism is seen in some places outside Kashmir as something not acceptable. Perhaps if you go to the Shia country like Iraq and Iran, they don't allow the freedom of the practice of Sufism in places. That was what was interesting, that this is practiced with all the limitation in the place. I found that a bit interesting in some sense. My question is, to what degree do you think that outside forces, I'm going beyond the boundaries or outside boundaries, I'm talking about perhaps the other powers, I'm talking about maybe Saudi Arabia, Qataris, or Iranian, are also involved to create the fictions that is going on in Kashmir. So for me, I think, I don't know much about Kashmir, I have to admit. From what I understand, at least in the last 20 years from where I am from, Iranians have influenced Kashmir to some degree for whatever the benefits or that could be. Similarly, Pakistan. So basically, how do you think that outside influences are also involved in what we are witnessing in Kashmir?
And is it connected? No. So in sense, well, certainly there are two questions, right? One is about Sufism and all of that, and this goes back to when you asked what Kashmiriyat is. Kashmir is very much about Sufi kind of culture, but also involves Sikhism, Hinduism, Buddhism, and different varieties of practicing Muslim. And second, well, the main question is about what do outside India and Pakistan, so Iran, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, US, UK, China, and all of them, what role do they play? Who wants to start? Irfan, do you want to start first? You're the quiet one.
I think it's a very complicated question to answer because there's no one simple answer to this. And also, what do we mean by influence? I think if, let's say, we take the example of Iran, I think what my understanding of it would be is that, you know, there were times when the Kashmiri Shiite community, you know, they had affiliations with Ayatollah Khomeini and all. So whatever was happening in Iran basically was borrowed by this community. But let's say if Iran wanted them to sort of stand up as a community, let's say standalone, you know, individually, and then say that we are Shiites and these are our sort of demands in competition with Sunnis and others. But I think it didn't work purely from the historical perspective of how Kashmiris have lived together as a society, right? You know, in Kashmir in 2010, one of the famous slogans was "Abhi abhi khabar aayi, Shia Sunni hai bhai bhai." That, you know, we've just recently heard that, you know, Shias and Sunnis are all brothers, so don't try to break us. And this was one of the famous slogans in the summer of 2010. I was filming there. And how much of other countries have influence depends on how their relationships are with India or Pakistan. So, for example, India is good friends with America. How much of influence or push they will have on India to get Kashmir resolved depends on how good relations or bad relations they have with India. Similarly, if China has good relations with Pakistan. And so in indirect ways, there are favors that, in a majority sense, India and Pakistan is enjoying purely living on the conflict of Kashmir from both sides.
While in Pakistani side of Jammu and Kashmir, no foreigner is allowed to cross some certain places. For example, nobody is allowed to enter the Pakistani side of Jammu and Kashmir if he is foreign. He must have an NOC certificate from the...
so no objections.
No objection certificate from Pakistani Home Ministry and establishment. Therefore, so no foreigner, if no foreigner is allowed to go there, no foreign religion is allowed to go there.
Is Salafi,
Simple.
Salafi influence is there now increasingly or no?
No. Salafis are already there. Salafis are there. Actually, Kashmir is not. The Kashmiri culture is basically depends on different sort of religion, and the culture is basically the practice. A person who if I want to make salah, nobody will stop me. If somebody want to go to Sharda Mata, nobody will stop him. This is something culture in Kashmir,
But I think the point here is that has that been changing,
Yes.
in terms of the external influences. For example, the Salafi Islam in the neighborhood. But is that changing Kashmir's complexion as well in terms of the, for example, Wahhabi jo hai, Islam, jihadi forces.
But sir, usme important
In
is,
AJK particularly.
we don't have any study, no some sort of survey, because
But in terms of your own experiences.
Not that much. I think.
Not that much.
Doubtfully
Not that much.
Because
Not
my
that
own
much.
impression vis-a-vis the Indian occupied Kashmir was that when people come together, try to build a mosque, you'll find 100 people coming together building a small mosque, and then someone comes from somewhere and gets huge money, and that's usually a very alien kind of mosque, because it's not the style that exists in Kashmir, but the style that is about sort of big ones, and that most of them is with Saudi money. Or people who have worked in Gulf and come back. Big change I noticed myself in last 10 years in Kashmir, whenever I've been in the past and then now, is, for instance, number of women who wear burqa.
Yes.
So rather than wearing Kashmiri dress, the kind of dressing, to wear burqa, and when you ask, but was this traditional?
Yeah.
No, but we were
No,
not good
it's
Muslims in the past.
Yes.
Now we are good Muslims. See, so there is a change taking place. But sorry, was it connected? Because then I'll ask Sana, because she will be free.
Yeah, it's actually connected. So, back to this idea of Kashmiriyat,
Yeah.
the perception that one gets, and this is a perception that's being spread widely, is that Kashmiriyat is all about Sufism, Kashmiriyat is all about shrines. But to me, Kashmiriyat is about way more than that. And
What is it about?
it's difficult to define. It's different people may manifest, express their Kashmiriyat in different ways. Whereas to some person, it may be this idea of going to shrines. To another person, it may be more about humanity and dealing with people in a different way. So, perception, as you said, perception, different people have different perception, and you get one perception of Kashmiriyat. This is a perception of Kashmiriyat that is being bombarded into people again and again in the media, and it can alienate some people. You have to accept that it can alienate some Kashmiris who would say, no, this is not my definition of Kashmiriyat.
So this
So
kind
we
of
have to be careful
multi-religiosity dimension of Kashmir can end up harming wider Kashmir. Nitasha, I mean, because you were the one who introduced the word, mentioned the word Kashmir first. I mean, what is Kashmir about? He's making a point that sometimes if you insist on multi-religiosity aspect of Kashmir and not other aspects of culture, then you may end up
It's a very personal experience.
alienating.
No, I agree with what she's saying. I mean, multi-religious or multi-faith aspect of Kashmir. There's just one. There's a whole register of quotidian ways of connecting to people. The everyday ways in which people remember. It's sort of like, I don't know, the Jungian collective unconscious. It's just part of when you interact with somebody, the shared repository of memories that you have, and in that somehow one is hopefully, and seems possible often, to be able to move past the, I mean, there's that trauma, there's this thing of, but then you are somehow able to at some level, unless you are at some extreme of a spectrum, you're somehow able to, when you interact, move beyond that and access also another shared storehouse of collective memory about who you are, what are the complexities of waqt or halat, time and circumstance that have made you see yourself. I mean, it's a way of belonging to Kashmir, which I think transcends religion or nation, but or national identity as India, Pakistan, but also allows people to somehow have that conversation. Perhaps language is a part of it, rituals are a part of it, but not in any simplistic way. Not in a simplistic way. I mean, yeah.
Sana, sir.
Okay, so you asked the question about young people, and when we were talking about memory, and I was quite impressed by the fact that a lot of people in the video were older people, and I understand that you were saying that it's because you were looking for people who remembered these things, but I think if we go back to Kashmiriyat and the idea of being Kashmiri, I think the identity today of being a Kashmiri is very deeply rooted in this idea of collective memory, and what Nitasha was just saying about this being something that helps us overcome the trauma, because I think over time the conflict has in many ways changed the meaning of Kashmiriya, because the situation in Kashmir has changed, and therefore that the way that we define ourselves as Kashmiris has also changed. But that means that young people today carry this, I don't know, maybe you could call it a burden of a collective memory that spans not only decades but centuries, because our story hasn't been told not from a Kashmiri view. Our story is told either by Pakistan or India or another third party. And I think that young people today, again, if we go back to the line of control as well, it's important, these videos, the first documentary you said was made by 2 filmmakers from either side of the line of control, and you said that they hadn't met, and that is the situation with Kashmiris from both sides of the line of control. But the thing is, we have the internet now, and we have this ability to communicate, which previously wasn't there. And I think today,
people without a state, there are different kinds of solutions have been given to us in the last how many years. And it seems to me these conflicts or the difficulty that the world is facing, not the world itself, but the people who are having the rights to their self-determination. I suppose the question I want to ask you, where do we start from? Do we have to go back to the old narrative of looking at, the point about Kashmir? I'm uncomfortable with this notion of nationalism, whatever form it is. And I think it reduces to individualism. We begin to think about that we have to act individually. Is there any way we can build? I don't like the notion of community. Community is problematic. Who do we include in our community? And who are these people in our community? Whether it's whatever form it may be. I'm uncomfortable with those things. I am an old lefty. I do look at the old narrative of classes. I do look at that. There are ways of building these cross boundaries of people who can come and unite together. I think film reflected that. Do we have to go beyond that kind of film? Do we have to look into the kind of thing that it can unite us in a meaningful manner? Not in the sense of that we have Saudis that they can help us to build a huge mosque, what Dibyesh was saying. I'm looking for the kind of thing that it can bring those ordinary people and they can fight. They can engage in a real fight. I'm not happy with the kind of thing that they come from outside, well, like Americans, democracy in the name of America, and goes to Kurdistan and liberate Iraqi Kurds. And yet they are also thinking about perhaps we can have Kurdish region in Syria. What else we want to divide? How else we want to divide? I'm not comfortable with those things. What I'm asking you, for somebody who doesn't know much about Kashmir, what is your solution? What's the way forward? Where do we go from here with this kind of film? Should we make more films? Should we look for the Kashmiri students or the whomever they may be to help us to build something meaningful and organic, and I think they can move us beyond these boundaries. So we can have no boundaries. Not the boundaries that I'm not talking about the no boundaries in respect of globalization. I'm not happy with that. I'm looking at the one that it can suit us, not them.
Who wants to start? Urfi? Not him? Okay, Irfan?
Because I want to complete my next project.
Okay, so Arif, because how do we approach? Part of it is through building of communities, through building of, or let's say, assertion of certain kind of ethno-national identity. And in this context, class or whatever is seen as secondary to most important factor that there are people belonging to the same class being divided in different territory. For them, so in your case, I think the priority is to try to remind the wider world and the people themselves that we exist, that we have something in common. Let us go back to, or let us bring back this idea of shared history and shared suffering, right? Irfan, you want to add anything?
I think the only thing that I would want to add is, the solutions that we might have heard in the past were solutions where the first party stakeholders were excluded, right? So they really are not solutions because we're not aware of the processes by which they arrived at those solutions.
So I mean, it was either India, Pakistan, whatever, but never Kashmiris.
The critical thing from here on is there's a very, very sensitized young population in Jammu and Kashmir, and much unlike how it was between 90s to 2000, there's a large emphasis on on literature and on other sources where you can actually communicate your stories yourself. So someone does not need Irfan to go there and make a film for them. I think they're already connected to 500 people anyways. And these are smaller versions of the stories that are lived by each individual personally. I think what that does is that it some ways makes weaker the larger narrative which is constructed by the two countries, and the only way where people have voluntarily started getting into the process before even before both the governments actually bring them on board. So I think one of the way forward is again going ahead with what young generation is going on to do, right? Of bridging this communication gap, of wanting to speak or meet with young Kashmiris of our own age from the other side of Kashmir, of together speaking with people from our own generation from India and Pakistan and sharing our stories. You necessarily don't want to grab their collar and say, find a solution for us. But together sit on the table and see how many disagreements do we have. We can't have disagreements for life. But at some point we'll agree on the same point. It can be simply a glass of wine or let's say the same food we eat. And that's where the process, my guess is, that's where the process of actually sitting down on the table, being tolerant to each other, having that level where you respect the other person even though you disagree with his opinions. So I think that is the only, not the only, but that's one of the best ways that I have sort of plunged into. That I am in no position to say this is good or this is bad, because you don't know what's good and bad. Actually, there are so many goods and so many bads that it will take a lifetime. The point is that what do I know best to do? The only thing that I've realized that I know to do is tell stories. I have messed up everything else in my life. Honestly, I tried so much, didn't work. So I think it's my failures in last 27 years of my life, a very successive failures of everything that I tried to do, which have pushed me to actually saying that, you can talk, you can tell stories, go ahead. So these are not my stories. I go work in Kashmir, I've been working, I just borrow these stories, I bring these stories to the people who have never heard these stories. I don't tell them, go and sympathize with them because they are crying. The point is that, you've heard those stories, just be aware that this is part of the narrative, because tomorrow if you're involved in the process directly or indirectly, this should be in your head.
Nitasha, last few words, we have to close.
Yeah, I think right now we're simply at the stage of getting going. It's not a very complicated. From a justice point of view, it's not complicated enough to be a choice between good versus good. I think that's where we have to get before we get any further. Right now, it's simply good versus bad. Right now, there's the level of injustice, I think, that people face is something that, first of all, legally needs to be addressed. The kinds of constraints that people face in terms of some of the ones highlighted here, and obviously economic constraints, but the political constraints as well. The biggest issue about laws, I think that the fact that the legal apparatus allows for brutality. The laws that need to be changed. That should the army have emergency powers for a period of as long as it has had them, the level of militarization, what does it mean? Those kinds of things that are actually no-brainers. You need to first move beyond that obstacle of the legal issues. Then there's, the wider dialogue on aspirations, of course, needs to happen, and for which we need need to tell the stories. I mean, there is obviously a danger in both an excess of poetry or an excess of politics. I mean, but at the same time, we have to constantly travel between being individual and being collective, being part of a collective. And I don't think we can get away around that. But in a situation like in Kashmir, I mean, it is very vexed, but in some sense it's quite simple. I mean, some of the most obvious things that need to happen for us to begin to talk about what needs to happen later are simply about repealing laws that are unjust, questioning the level of militarization, the basic questions of human rights, getting issues that are well recognized as being, that on which there is no conflict in terms of agreement on the basics of it. So just getting those questions of people's rights into the frame. I mean, as far as outside meddling is concerned, I mean, in a sense, we are not as high on the agenda of the superpowers as some of the other places in the world. So that has its bad side, but also has its good side in the sense that you still have the possibility of being able to move beyond that. But the one thing the idea that it is the line of control. I mean, the fact that just focus on the fact for a moment that it is a line of control. It has always been for that long a line that seeks to control people. That just the semantics of it. That it's what is happening to people is that they are being controlled. Their aspirations are being controlled and controlled for the interests of the two nation states and not for the people of Kashmir. So I think before that good versus good question of who's part of that collective, what should the future be, I think the very basic issues of livelihood, of political freedom, of technological access, of being able to use mobile phones, of being able to not be monitored, not be picked up without, not be picked up and put into detention without any legal rights if you haven't done anything, so preemptively. Those kinds of things I think are really important. And I think both films that or films or other kind of creative output that is more in the humanist vein, like this one, as well as the kind where people come and throw screens and smash screens and say that what you're doing is wrong, we won't allow that. I think there's space for both of those things to happen alongside, because there's all these different constituencies that are part of Kashmir, and some of those stories are now emerging. I mean, there's a whole list of very interesting movies that have been coming out, and I think we should put them together because they each tell the story of different communities of Kashmir. The Kashmiri Hindus, Kashmiri Muslims, people who have disappeared, people who have been brutalized by the army, people who've been affected by lack of trade. So we're at the very kind of beginning stages somehow. But if history tells us anything, look at Berlin. If history tells us anything, that systems eventually implode, and who knows, maybe it's just a rumor that one day brings a wall down. So.
Thank you. And in fact, in terms of, I just wanted to show this picture because this is what most of you would not have seen this, right? And this from 2013 February, around 10th or 12th of February. He was 12-year-old boy, Muzammil Rathir. He lost his eyesight because of pellet injury by CRPF, which is paramilitary. Now, and in fact, I went to Kashmir mainly to actually try to find out what happens to these people once the media is gone. And what was sad, what was sad was that, of course, he has lost one eye, 90% of sight. State, which has brutalized him, doesn't care. Police lodges FIR, first investigation report against him, so he's only 12-year-old. Why? To cover their own back, to say that, well, he was actually stone pelting. Now, whether he was or not, I don't know, right? And his family says it doesn't matter. He's a 12-year-old kid, there's FIR. Now, they're not doing anything against him. It's not that they're punishing him. But FIR means essentially that he'll never ever get a job in government service. He'll never get a passport, clearance for passport, ever in his life. And there are 30,000 plus young Kashmiris or middle-aged Kashmiris who do not get passports to travel abroad. Right? Now, these kinds of brutality exist at every level. And there have been no action by the Indian state to do anything about it. Right? That's one kind of violence you could see. I mean, and these kinds of violence exist everywhere. And of course, in 2010, which you mentioned about the stone pill, around 127 people, most of them young boys and even young men. And again, at best, state will offer compensation from time to time. That's it. But if we do nothing to prevent it from happening, and at the same time, sadly, even those who claim to fight on behalf of resistance also don't do anything for most of the victims who are young. So there is a class dimension there, by the way. Most of these kids who get injured are generally from not the privileged class. So the privileged class would be doing the Facebook kind of, activism and warrior and sometimes even whatever. But people who are biggest victims are generally from the poor families. Now, in a certain sense, there is a lot of, when you look at it, there is a lot of resilience there. There's a lot of faith of people in Azadi, for many of them, or in some kind of reconciliation. But there's also there's a big amount of suffering, or even silences. On Indian occupied side, it's easier to say it. On Pakistan occupied, it's slightly more difficult. But part of the reason is not because it doesn't exist, but part of the reason is because there's a lot of psychological pressure on people to not say that they support freedom from both India and Pakistan, because that would mean they're not good Muslims. That would mean they're not thankful enough to the Pakistani government. And those kind of psychological pressure is used extensively on Pakistan side. So in a certain sense, what we live in situation is, of course, that where we talk of Kashmir, we should be talking more and more Kashmiris. What the solution is, I don't know, but clearly this is not, the status quo is not the answer. We have to move beyond status quo.
How would the referendum though?
Sorry?
How would the referendum that was promised
Yes, that was, when the Indians took over Kashmir and then Pakistan, also the ideas of referendum, they were plebiscite. They were promised that, and of course both of the government don't follow it. Indians say, well, Kashmir have been participating in elections every 5 years, so they don't need plebiscite because we have already done it. And Pakistani say we'll support it, but the constitution on Azad Kashmir, which you technically mean free Kashmir, makes it very clear, the interim constitution, that only those who support Pakistan and not Azadi, which is freedom, can become the prime minister and the president. You see different kinds of, different modes of control in both parts. But the fact of the matter is, generally, no one has given voice to Kashmiris to express themselves. Whether, ideas, Indians also know most Kashmiris like us actually, because we are secular. Pakistanis say, most of them like us because we're Muslim or whatever, right? The fact is, if both of them have so much of confidence, why not give them an opportunity to at least express once and for all what they want? On that note,
just one last note, connecting to Farhan's point about the left aspect and the economic aspect. Part of that is also that in a certain sense it is Kashmir, what is happening in Kashmir is also a symptom of the larger violence of the post-colonial Indian state, which is where your emerging power, this emerging powers thing, the extent to which, because in a protest about disability rights, a boy recently lost his, somebody who's actually, an awardee of, an accomplished sports person, lost his eyesight recently in police brutality 2 days ago in Delhi, 2 or 3 days ago in Delhi also. So the fact that this kind of brutalization just happens at levels of society, because it's like this juggernaut of unjust power, and especially in this race for the economic, of the market thing, the whole emerging power market thing, that also enables that kind of thing to continue in the peripheries of the state.
Yeah, so what in a certain sense, what Kashmir could not, had not done it, or whatever it is in the 1990s, when it was more violence, the use of violence to resist, or armed resistance, is that the kind of going across, going beyond the boundary, so going beyond Kashmir to, let's say, sort of influence opinion or get solidarity. They have done that vis-a-vis Pakistan, it doesn't work. India is too powerful for that. Some of the Kashmiris try to go to wider Ummah using religiosity. That also doesn't help beyond the point. In 50s, 60s, there's US and UK were very keen on sort of pressurizing India. That has not worked. And remember China factor. China in mid-90s made it very clear they will not accept any new independent state in the region. Reason for that is simple, because an independent Jammu Kashmir would imply independent Tibet or Xinjiang and elsewhere. So we have to remember what kind of situation they're in. On that note, some of you are aware on this Thursday we are having an event on women resistance and the Kurdish question in the 21st century, because our intention here as part of Emerging Powers program is to look at different types of stateless nations. So on Friday we had an event on Tibet, we have on Kashmir, and of course on Thursday we have on Kurdish question. The idea is there are student bodies and student organizations, and Farhan has also been involved. Some of them are encouraging them on third world movement. But there is a certain kind of resistance At the same time, not seeing third world as unified, resisting the West, but also resistance within the third world. And finally, 2nd of June, please note that, well, in your mind or diary, whatever you want to, we will organize a very big event here on Kashmir on 2nd of June, and we'll get very, well, it would be, well, I can't, but you'll get very interesting kind of people from Indian occupied Kashmir mainly, but also from Europe and UK. So we will have scholars, we'll have writers, we'll have musician or whatever singers. The idea is to remind us of Kashmiris, contested present and possible futures. That is the title of that conference. And finally, let me thank again all three of you here, and Tahir and Conciliation Resources for making this possible, and Laura. Now, you may not, she's with Conciliation Resource, but she was and is still a student of ours for Masters. She was a Master's student there. Thank you very much. She's the one who coordinated all of this. Thanks.
Thank you very much.